The last part of the Cold War unit we're going to look at is the end of the Cold War. Just a quick little review, right? Looking at some of the characteristics of the Cold War, we have the space race. We just spent some time looking at that. The arms race, that was a race where they chopped off their arms and they see who could flap them faster. That was just a joke. All right, that's the buildup of weapons, right? But most importantly, we're looking at the ideological differences, meaning the differences in the way of life, with the U.S. being more democratic and capitalistic and the Soviet Union being more totalitarian and communist. We start off with Ronald Reagan. So we're even though there are lots of presidents that contributed to the end of the Cold War, Ronald Reagan was the president when it ended, right? And he took some drastic steps to maybe bring about the end. So he came up with the famous evil empire comment, even though he was encouraged not to. He went ahead and said it anyway. Now, he had a history of being against the Soviets. He supported challenges against the spread of communism around the world, especially Grenada and Nicaragua, right? And this was a famous quote that I thought, kind of put a little bit, some things into context for us. It says, "The Soviet leaders have openly and publicly declared that the only morality, and morality means right or wrong, they recognize is that which will further their cause, which is world revolution." So he's pretty much saying that the Soviet Union isn't interested in what's right or wrong. They're only interested in what will help them spread communism around the world. So he kind of became, that strong leader standing up to the spread of communism. One of the things he does is he launches a massive increase in military spending, which includes the Strategic Defense Initiative. And then the nickname becomes Star Wars. And I'll show you a little bit more about it on the side page. I just thought this was a funny cartoon, not just because I love Star Wars, but because it kind of shows Ronald Reagan here as a kid, all right, dreaming about this system that he has. And here is the system. Right? The goal of the SDI was to use ground-based and space-based systems to protect the United States from Soviet nuclear missiles. So you see the key at the bottom, right? We have the SDIO, the Army, Air Force, Threat, and Phase 1, right? And these are all satellites that are up in space. So when a Soviet nuclear missile takes off, immediately it's picked up by satellites and sensors in space, right? And then the U.S. is then quickly able to respond and shoot the missiles down before they explode in the United States. Wasn't able to come to fruition, but the idea that the U.S. was willing to invest money in it and attempt to make it definitely made the Soviet Union worried. Now, Reagan's rival, all right, was a man by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev, and we'll look at him specifically here in a second. But basically, once Reagan became president, all right, he initiated this massive buildup of military, predominantly military weapons, that the Soviet Union was not able to keep up with. So that set off a whole bunch of internal issues in conjunction with what was going on in Afghanistan, all right, throughout the 1980s, that the Soviets were definitely kind of reeling, kind of back on the ropes, right? Their economy was struggling, their satellite nations were struggling, all right? Here's a map showing us the Soviet Union here, and then these are 7 independent countries, but are satellites of the Soviet Union, meaning they're under the direct influence or the direct control of the Soviet Union. So basically, the USSR is starting to crack a little bit and starting to show some wear and tear, which is pretty much all the people need to revolt against communist rule. Right. Here is Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, he starts off as Reagan's rival, but they actually develop a friendship that lasts later on after the Cold War is over. He actually attends Reagan's funeral, right, when Reagan passes away. All right, pretty good story. But Reagan initiates 2 programs to try and fix or right the ship. Basically, if you think about the Soviet Union as a sinking ship, okay, Gorbachev tries to do things to repair the Soviet Union, but ultimately he's not successful. So the first thing is referred to as perestroika, right? It's a restructuring or reorganization of the Soviet government, right, to try and bring in a little bit more democracy or a little bit more capitalism, right, which obviously goes against what the Soviet Union stood for or was about. The second one was glasnost, which was a period of openness, where people were allowed to criticize the government, newspapers were allowed to start writing arguments, right? And there was a definite opening towards the United States as well. There were a lot of a couple different weapons treaties that are going to be signed during this period. So those are some steps that Gorbachev makes. All right, and now we look at the Berlin Wall. Now the Berlin Wall, we talked about it early on in the unit. It's the wall that divides East Berlin from West Berlin. It was put up by the Soviets, right, all throughout the 1960s. But basically what happens is the Soviet Union realizes that they can't control the people in Berlin anymore like they could in the 50s and 60s. So people are allowed to travel back and forth. They actually protested for weeks leading up to it. Right, and then in 1990, right, Germany is now going to be fully united. It's going to be free from communist rule, right, and it all comes back to the Berlin Wall coming down. I put the quote here, marking an end to the Iron Curtain, right, the idea where, there's a split, West Europe and East Europe being communism, right. This kind of was the first chink in the armor, so to say, right. Very famous speech. Here's Reagan again, right, so we'll hit play, let you take a peek at this.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
All right, and that was kind of like, one of the seminal moments during the Cold War where President Reagan is telling Secretary Gorbachev, you need to tear this wall down. This just isn't working anymore, right? And a lot of people credit that with being the beginning of the end. The Berlin Wall was the unofficial symbol of the Cold War. I had talked to you about that. It symbolized the division between the East, which would be communists, and the West, which would be independent nations, the United States and their allies. Right. Here's the big question. Who won the Cold War? Really, there wasn't a winner, right? Because they never actually went head-to-head. There definitely was, the U.S. definitely feels as though they won, but that's more so because the Soviet Union actually drops out of the race, right? Because they weren't able to keep up with the United States, right? So I put Russia there because at the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Union breaks up and it becomes what's known as the Commonwealth of Independent States, and Russia is back to being its original nation, right? And a lot of the other former Soviet socialist republics become independent nations as well. But basically, the United States outspent the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union as a whole couldn't keep up with the United States. And then this is just a little graphic organizer kind of bringing you all the major details here, right? We focused in on Reagan's foreign policy here. Here's some of the things that Gorbachev did as well, right? But reality, a lot of presidents contributed, but Reagan's kind of the one that's seen as the one that brought about the end of the Cold War.